Welcome everybody. Welcome to this World Economic Forum CNBC debate. Today we are talking about multinationals in China, the challenges and the way forward. Over recent months, we've heard from a number of senior business leaders who've expressed in public their view that they feel that the operating environment for foreign businesses in China is getting more difficult. The Chinese government, as you would imagine, doesn't necessarily agree with that interpretation of events. But a recent survey carried out by the European Chamber of Commerce indicated that about 40% of those businesses who answered the question felt that the operating environment was likely to deteriorate over the coming 2 years. Now, what exactly does that mean when so many companies have a China strategy and see China as a growth driver for their business going forward? Well, we'll try and get through that subject over the next 60 minutes here in Tianjin. Let me introduce our panel to you. We have Nani Beccalli with us, the president for GE International. GE has been in China for more than 100 years. It has over 13,000 employees, and CNBC must be included among those companies, just for the record, so that we know where we stand. Some $6 billion in revenue stream from this market alone. Glenn Jordan is with us on the panel. He is president for the Pacific Group at Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola acquired its first bottling plant here after World War I. It's one of the first large brands, I think, to be distributed in China since Deng Xiaoping opened up the market to foreign players in 1979. Takeshi Niinami is president and CEO of Lawson, the convenience store operator, came to China under a joint venture with a local partner. It now has some $20 million in capital and 300 stores. The company has said recently that they plan to expand to 10,000 shops in 10 years. And let me welcome Jia Kang to our panel. He is president of the Institute of Fiscal Studies. That is a think tank with connections to the Ministry of Finance here in China. I think we may describe you as an economic insider. That's probably the right and appropriate term here. A man who's received a number of high honors in China for his economic analysis, the prestigious Sun Yifan Prize among them. He's also a sometime advisor to China's central government on economic policy. So a man very close, it would seem then, to the levers of power. We welcome all of our panel to this discussion. So let's get on to the thorny issue then of the challenges that multinationals face in this marketplace at the moment. How has the operating environment changed over the last 2 years or so? Nani, maybe we can start with you. We've heard about increased local competition. We've heard about increases in the cost of production. Some of the major headlines over this last year have talked about industrial strife at Japanese auto plants. We've seen demands for higher compensation for workers here. I wonder if you could share with us some of the GE experience on the operational side over recent times.
Well, point number one, you said it very rightly. GE has an experience of 100 years in this country, more than 100 years in this country. And I can remember when we really started our first major operation, manufacturing facility in 1984, and it was a plastics manufacturing facility. Now, we don't have the plastics business anymore, but this was our first real big investment that we had in this country. But Geoff, I think that what we have to look here in China is not so much a picture of a frozen frame of this moment, but we have to look at the evolution of China from, say, 1978, when the major reforms started, to today, And I think that we have to compliment them for what they've done, and we have to look at projecting it into the future. Now, China is, we call it a new economy. China is not a new economy because if you look into the data, you'll find out that in 1820, more than 50% of the economy of the world was between China and India. So China is coming back, if you want. And I think that it is suffering these growing pains that an economy of the size of this potential is suffering. So you have growing pains in the legislation, you have growing pains in employment regulation, you have growing pains in every single aspect of the business. I think that the attitude that as multinational companies we have to have is to work with them and to help them in solving some of these problems, and sincerely not to take any kind of antagonistic approach, because antagonism is not going to get us anywhere. This is going to be the biggest economy in the world. The question is when, it's not the what. The question is
sure. This is not antagonistic. This is about constructive cooperation. So let's just deal with cost of production.
Yes.
What has changed over the last, say, 18 months, 5 years, that has made it much harder for multinationals to be as profitable as they were in the past here? GE itself has decided to shift production in at least one operation that I know of from China to the United States. Some of that, surely, was about cost of production.
There are several different factors. I wouldn't put it only as cost of production. But yes, cost of production went up. But isn't it the economic development of a country that is realizing its industrial policy that is becoming a true economy, and where it is a given fact that costs are going up? Look at what happened in Europe, for instance. I know that Europe might not be the subject of the discussion, but look at what happened in the economies in Hungary, in the Czech Republic, in Poland, where as they became part of the European Union, the cost all of a sudden started lifting. Same thing is going to happen here for China. And we can envision a future where the cost of China is probably going to be on the same level as the cost of the developed countries. But that's not bad, because China is going to be the cradle for technology, China is going to be a huge market, and so on. So there are other advantages that China can bring into the picture, which is not only the cost of production.
Okay. I wouldn't be doing my job as a company within the GE family if I didn't get this question out right up front at the beginning here. Geoff Immelt, if the comments were reported correctly, appeared to touch a nerve when it was said that he was a little critical that perhaps things are getting a lot harder for international companies operating in the Chinese economy. I wonder if I could just ask you to address that issue up front,
Absolutely.
because no doubt it will come out in a question at some point.
I am glad to do it, because I have to say that the words of Geoff Immelt, unfortunately, were misrepresented. And what Geoff Immelt was saying was exactly what I just said, which is the evolution of a country, the becoming an industrial power, is going to comport a certain amount of factors that are going to make competition a harder competition. I mean, it is in the right of the Chinese to develop their own state-owned enterprises, to develop their own industry, to develop their own technology. More technology developed in China means more competition for us, for the multinational companies. So this was the statement that Geoff came up with.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's move on. Glenn, I want to come to you, and perhaps you could share with us some of the Coca-Cola experience around these specific areas of changes to taxation, increases in cost of production. We obviously know Nani says, this is all part of a cycle, it's natural. But businesses have to operate in cycles. They have to go where they can make the most money and the best profit and the best return. How do you feel the environment has changed in terms of dollars and cents profitability from the Chinese market?
Thank you, Geoff. Let me just provide a brief framework of how do we see China at this point in time. Let's start with something that is obvious but is critical, which is China has become increasingly, exceedingly important for multinationals and its future. And consequently, the main implication of this is that the market has become very, very competitive. In the industry where we do business in the fast-moving consumer goods, almost all companies have learned very quickly. They've demonstrated a readiness to operate wherever needed with lower margins, exchanging that for market share in the long term. So on this environment, there's several things that are happening in these fast-moving consumer companies. The first one is the absolute need to have an efficient value chain. And you'll see companies struggling and working hard to have an efficient value chain. The second one is the importance for the future of acquiring human capital, developing talent, also for the long term. And the transition from just concentrating yourself to have a coverage and your products available in this huge country to beginning to really work on the consumer side, the strategies, building brands. We believe all of this is very good for China. It obviously very positive for industry growth, very positive for healthy contribution, and very important for the human capital of a country, which at the end is so critical for the sustainability of any business. But that's from the business perspective. Let me add quickly from the other perspective of the theme of this forum. And that is that, of course, there's a significant and a rapid evolution on the policies, on the priorities of the government. And what we believe is critical is that we multinationals have to proactively be very, very near, understand that evolution and know what it really means to us. And also recognize that we can influence a little bit that outcome. And there's mechanisms to do that. The relationship among our countries is very important. The future regulations are critical. So we should consciously play a role on that. A good example of that is the USA-China Business Council. It has played a significant role in many occasions, and it will in the future, and we, the multinationals, can all contribute. Let me just finish by saying that from the perspective of our company, we are, of course, totally committed to China. We have pledged and committed a $2 billion accelerated investment last year for 3 years. We are clear on track of developing and on delivering that investment plan. But more critical, we believe that we need to align ourselves as China evolves to the priorities of the government, to the future priorities. So everything that we do, we really try very hard to make it in line, to make an extra contribution, both in business and in communities. So we're very, very proud of our efforts, whether it's our contributions to Sichuan in the form of schools for reconstruction or our contributions to the environment in water. But let me say in closing that there's clearly a fast-changing market environment that we all need to adapt to. There's an evolving policy and regulations. Like every country, I believe the rate of change is correlated to the rate of growth, so it's very big in China. And that we at Coca-Cola are very committed to the long term, to our investments. And we think that as we've done in the last 32 years, we'll find our way forward as we continue to increase our investments, but always mindful that we need to contribute to the well-being of China and its people.
Glenn, one of the hot issues at the moment is the rate of inflation, and it's one of those questions that will, I would imagine, affect a company that's in your space. Do you think that this is going to impact your profitability over the next few years if the rate of inflation here continues to rise?
That's a good point. I think that most people in business will say that a little bit of inflation is healthy for business. Deflation is terrible, and accelerated inflation is even worse. So as far as the country, the government is able to manage within, I would say, a decent low range, we're not really worried. And there's nothing that I can think of, despite the pressures in many areas, that will say that it will get out of hands in the near future.
Well, let's, if we can, be quite honest with the audience, because what you've given us so far would suggest that Coca-Cola has no concerns whatsoever operating in this economy, and that you are a poster child for the successful multinational that does business in this marketplace. I would love to believe it's all true, but I'm a journalist.
Sure.
And like most journalists, I have a cynical eye, which I bring to these things. What are the challenges in the operating environment that you can identify today that may resonate with everybody else sat on this panel?
Right. Yeah. What I've been trying to represent is not that everything is going perfect. What I've been trying to represent is that the challenges of fast competition, the challenges of evolution, of regulation, that we had a history. Some disappointments, some of them big, but we have a history that says we can navigate through them. Stay close to the evolutions, be a participant in the dialogue, try to shape, to influence, understand the policies, and live through that. And so far, we do have success to show that we've navigated through that.
Okay. Takeshi, let me come to you, because I think the question for you is one about local competition. And it's one, I think, that in the retail sector you feel very keenly. Do you feel that the playing field is not level at this point, that there are some changes being implemented from central government level that mean it's getting harder for you to compete against domestic incumbents?
Yeah, well, we found lots of barriers, and it's not apple-to-apple competition. Some products are not sold by the foreign capitals. Only the local players can, sell, such as the cigarettes, license, stuff like that. Having said that, I found much better than before for foreign capitals in retail side. There are two things. One, we were talking about Shanghai, Beijing, Guangzhou, big cities. Instead of talking about big cities, what about major cities other than those? They invited us to open stores with a strong leadership. Mayors and zone managers, they are passionate to bring in foreign capitals for retail business. So that means they provide us with a lot of support, finding locations and giving us approval within 3 months. It's amazing. We've been in China for 20 years. It never happened. So I think other than big major cities, they are so keen about the retail business or service sector. And on top of that, I sense that the China itself is more or less put the priority on the service sector, domestic demand. So we have know-how expertise, and they think more of us than before. So I think we have a different scenery than the probably production manufacturers. So I think things are getting better, but still, we have to pay lots of duties and tariff on the import things, and invisible barriers to import things. So they definitely protect their own products, own production. That's what we have to let them understand. Customers need foreign products as well. Plus, it's good for competition to drive the domestic competition. So I think all in all, it's getting better.
That's encouraging that your message is that you find things are improving. Your business has had some difficulties in the past with joint venture partnerships.
That's right.
Could you just talk about that and how you feel demands from joint venture partners are getting tougher or easier?
Okay, easier, but up until 10 years ago, there was no interest amongst the senior management of our national enterprise partner. They just thought about, maybe selling things only instead of making profits, because they were all, officials sent by the Shanghai government. But now they are getting keen to make business viable. So big change happened. So I think more or less optimistic about the things going on, but too slow now to compare with entrepreneurs. Another factor I see is the entrepreneurs are emerging in service sector. which is good for the Chinese domestic demand. So they got to be more quick, as a matter of fact.
Okay, well, let's move on the conversation then, because I want to talk about the macroeconomic environment and whether that is improving or getting more treacherous for multinational companies. Square and center in this debate, of course, is the renminbi, and at this point, we expect we'll see this week in the United States another round of politicking over what level the Chinese currency should be at. That creates some instability in the minds of companies that do business here. The issue of the suppression of the value of the yuan is also generating concerns, I think, about investing into the Chinese economy if you're a multinational. Give us your read on how concerned multinationals should be about the way the macroeconomic picture is evolving here and the stability or otherwise that's being generated by the central government.
Well, I prefer to speak in Chinese to be more fluently. 下面我用中文来做个。
Now I will switch to Chinese. In the discussion just now, my impression was that it was not really a debate. It was not very confrontational or controversial, because it seems that the three entrepreneurs had very similar opinions as I do. Before I talk about the RMB value, I would like to give a framework of my understanding of the macro environment. First of all, when we talk about multinationals coming to China to develop, they need to realize that this market is getting more and more market-based and globalized, and the level of globalization is increasing. After China's WTO accession, we are living up to our accession commitments in all areas, and I think this is widely recognized. And secondly, this is a truly growth market. In my opinion, in the next few decades, the Chinese economy would be less and less of a dichotomy, and we will have faster urbanization, we will have a higher degree of informatization, the economy will be more and more governed by the rule of the market and the rule of the law. In this process, a great amount of demand will be released, and the Chinese economy will be more and more in interaction with the rest of the world. Thirdly, talking about the stability of the policy, facts have shown, comparing China with other emerging developing economies, the Chinese policies have been very stable. It's actually among the most stable policy environment. We can also look at the cost issue in terms of the cost of labor. Recently, there was an incident, which is Foxconn in Shenzhen. The company, responding to the escalating cost of labor locally, had to move its factory to the inland province of Henan. So in some areas, we do see a trend that some industrial zones are upgrading themselves to move up the value chain, and the traditional manufacturing has to be moved to somewhere else. And this is actually a beneficial trend if it happens in an orderly way and with government's leadership. Currently, we are not at the Lewis turning point yet, and currently, in terms of the labor cost, we are adapting to a new situation, and particularly in terms of the shift of manufacturing locations to other regions in China. And it is very natural that some companies need to raise wages for the workers in order to retain good talents. The fifth issue I want to address is about tax. To do business in China, we can see an improved tax environment. the environment is better and better regulated. But we do see a leveling of the tax level. In the past, we had a lot of preferential treatment to foreign capital, but now, in terms of tax, the playground has been leveled. However, it is important to note that the tax policy has a clear industrial orientation. For instance, for the energy-saving industries, there are tax benefits, and multinationals do have an advantage or leadership in this regard. So they do have a competitive advantage.
If we can move on very quickly, and I can bring you to a close just with a comment on the renminbi, that would be lovely.
我回应一句话，就是最后。
You mentioned RMB. I think it's just one of the many economic parameters or indicators. Currently, it is more flexible, it is more market-based. I don't think it can be a negative influence on the economy. I think it's more or less a positive factor in the economy.
Thank you very much indeed for that, and for bringing it to a nice conclusion. But I do want to move this on, because if you don't see tension certainly comes out in the surveys when business people are asked, in an environment perhaps slightly different to this, to give their view of how they think the playing field may not be level. Now, we did have an indigenous innovation policy that was rolled out by the government and widely criticized for the impact it would have specifically on high-tech industries, or those industries that were developing IP in China. Nani, GE is at the forefront of this technology in many areas of say, wind turbine power, green technology, all sorts of things that GE is involved in. I wonder if you could speak specifically to this piece of legislation, because it does seem to me that that law in itself has been identified as evidence that the Chinese are not willing to play fair with multinational companies.
Sure, we didn't like the law of indigenous innovation the way it was formed initially. However, I don't know if you noticed, but just recently some high-level government officials came up with statements that have watered down the original law, and now things that are manufactured and technology that is developed by multinationals in China can be considered as indigenous innovation, which is fair. Okay, if I look at this market, if I look at what we did, in 2003 we opened up a research center in Shanghai, which is today about 1,400 people strong. And if you look at the number of technologies that we have in China, all in all, we are approaching about 2,000 people, which is a fairly considerable number, which means that we consider China not only as a market, not only as a manufacturing place. We have about 26 manufacturing locations in China, but we consider it also as a potential source, strong potential source for technology. I don't know if you remember, but some time ago we came up with our reverse innovation concept, which is really the one of developing products in China for China. So we use the technologies that we have in Shanghai to develop products that are designed for the Chinese market, and this for us has been a huge success.
So what do you think was the critical issue that softened that piece of legislation?
But the critical issue was the fact that at same level of price, same level of condition, no matter what, the stuff that was manufactured in China was preferred. No question asked, nothing. So now there is a fair competition that is opened up, and I think that this is favorable. Is the legislation perfect? By all means, no. But remember what I said before. I mean, this is a place that is evolving the legislation, involving intellectual property legislation, and so on. You, as an NBC Universal person, you know exactly what some of the intellectual property issues we have with the country of China, and by the way, not only with the country of China. So I think that there is an evolution, and I think that we have to help them in developing the right right set of legislation.
The other issue that always comes up is lack of clarity in the legal landscape. clearly things have settled down in terms of this piece of legislation. But Glenn, I want to bring that topic to you because you have been involved in M&A activity around the world as you've developed and grown into emerging markets. Everybody in the room, I'm sure, will be familiar with the run that you took at Huiyun Juices and the fact that the government at the time stepped in, it seems, and didn't want Coca-Cola to do that deal. Now, that has infuriated legislators in the United States, or it did at the time, who felt that it was in breach of the spirit, at least, maybe not of the letter of the WTO, in allowing access. Can I ask you just to address that question and talk about whether you think if you were to launch that bid today, the Chinese government would be prepared to let it through?
It's a topic of a lot of interest. Let me just first say that clearly it was an important acquisition. We worked very hard. We thought we could bring expertise, technology, know-how in juices. We have the large business juices in the world. We're the biggest player with a brand called Minute Maid, etc. And it was a big disappointment that it was not approved. We thought it was going to approve. We were ready. All of those things that you do when you're thinking that something's good for your business. Now, looking in retrospective, the position that we took was one of, okay, if those are the rules, we need to navigate through this. It just makes my previous point that I try to explain. And what we decided very shortly was, okay, we'll redeploy our resources. We'll continue to then invest in our own brands and grow organically if that's going to be the rules of the game. And so far, we've been very successful in that. We have a fantastic results the last 2 years. Your question is fascinating, given everything that happened after that. And we express our disappointment very openly, but also express, if that's the rules of the game, we'll play by them. If they will have changed, I think that still to be seen. It's clear that there's evolving regulation. We prefer clarity, even if we don't like it, that confusion and no rules of the game like in other countries. Now, things can be influenced, and this is one example. Things might change. We all can work on that. But again, I think the story behind the story is that you just have to understand what's happening and find your way through this and be involved in influencing and shaping the future.
But is it making it harder for you to take that decision to invest locally if you still feel that some of that overhang of antitrust resistance will work against you?
It's very hard to tell what buy versus build, and history will tell. As I said, we're being successful. Will we be even more if we were able to acquire this company? I can tell you that it's difficult, of course. You were ready and it's not happening, but it has not in any way break our determination to succeed in China one way or another.
Okay. Takeshi, I think we should bring the same topic of conversation to you in a sense. You're always actively involved in investing into new store openings, and it's an area that I think is going to be key. Multinationals can bring their capital to China, but are they going to be allowed to play by fair rules to put that investment into the market? Do you think the environment, as the European survey suggests, is going to worsen or improve?
I think improved, because as I mentioned earlier, this service sector has been more emphasized by maybe the government. But I'm talking about local governments. Local governments has their own policy to bring in foreign capital, such as the service industry. They favor us, such as lower corporate rate. So there is a different scenery in maybe major cities like Shanghai, Beijing, Guangzhou, and Chongqing, Tianjin, maybe Dalian. They are different to bring us with more welcome. And so China is a huge country, though there is a policy, maybe the central government, but we have to see micro to see each city and each policy of each city. That's very important. Yeah. Although Shanghai is too competitive, and I think even local players are not making profits. We do, as a matter of fact, a little bit. But So, see the micro, small cities. Now small, but invested by lots of central government money, and let's say inland, which is a very different things going on than 2 years ago. So take a look at in detail.
Okay. Professor, let me bring this to you then, and if you could keep your answer short so that we can have time for the questions. It is the one about the legislation and the way that it's applied. Could you comment on the regulatory landscape? Most multinationals will tell you they're pretty happy with the laws as they're drafted. They can work with them. What they get upset about is when they're implemented in a local situation, they tend to go against the multinational or the FIE.
好的，我了解的情况是这样。
So according to my information, the framework of laws and regulations is favorable to multinationals in China, but there is some problem of implementation or execution of these laws and regulations. Yes, there are some such cases. I think it is not only for multinationals. This situation is also true for domestic companies. Everyone is facing this problem. So we have a Chinese saying that you are welcome, but you will go through some very lot of difficulties when the door is closed, when you are in the market. And so actually a lot of difficulties and challenges in the details and in the implementations and the execution. However, this is only one side of the story. In many other places, in many local governments, they have powers, and local governments, and they have the power to give more favorable treatment to some investors. Of course, people are criticizing them this kind of favorable treatment to someone while not to others. But it can reflect that in the process of the legislation of China, it's a little bit flexible, and we have a big framework. It's open. It's fair, equal to everyone. However, in details, we have a lot of loopholes. We have a lot of problems, and we cannot cover every corner of China with very good implementation or law enforcement. We have the framework of laws, but law enforcement is a problem in China. Of course, we need to be patient to wait for a better law enforcement system in China. Thank you.
Indeed for that. So the picture is varied across the country. I take that to be the broader answer. Let's open up the conversation to our audience. Let me invite questions from you. If you'd like to address a specific panelist, then please ask for them by name. If not, if it's generally for the panel, then just throw your question out there and we'll do our best with it. Who's going to start us off? Can I see a hand? Yes, sir, at the front. Can we get a microphone down to this gentleman here? And if you could just tell us who you are and what company you represent so that we know where you're coming from.
My name is Ken Mori. I'm from Roland Berger, Japan, strategy consulting firm. And a few months ago, we conducted survey in China, 500 European companies based in China, and asked really, relevant questions to them. And the answer was very much, in line with discussion today. I think 40% of them said that they are really concerned about regulations or regulation changes or implementation of the regulation. However, on the other hand, more than 60%, nearly 70% of the corporations said that China is number one, or at least one of the number 3 destination of future investment. So this is also in line with, I think, your comments. And my question is a little bit different from today's discussion's viewpoint. Yeah, all this means that China is growing and the efficiency is improving. I think the country is getting competitive. People get rich and with big dream. It's a really great country. I'm sorry. And on the other hand, my country, Japan, or countries you are from, very tiny growth and a lot of unemployment. the society is not that vitalized, lack of energy. Have you learned anything from China in order to get revitalize our countries?
I think, sir, that's another debate that we can have about Japan. But I'll take the point on, and let's get another question or a comment. Let's see if we can get as many questions or comments from the floor. So I take your point that basically you're frustrated that Japan isn't exhibiting the same dynamism as we're seeing in China at the moment. Yeah.
My name is Mark Zavatsky. I work for the Russian business magazine Expert as Asia correspondent. I want to ask about the rising cost in China. Mr. Beccalli-Falco mentions that it's natural that the cost is rising, and probably it will raise to the European level at some point. But who will bear this cost? I mean, do Western consumers should expect to pay more for products because they get used to cheaper and cheaper products like every year? Or we're looking for another big factory like wallet factory? And if so, which country would might repeat China example and become a second China?
Okay, that's a good question. Thank you very much indeed for that. Nani, let's throw that straight at you. So where is GE moving its new production facilities to? Because China's getting expensive.
GE, you see, we never make, because of the nature of our products, because of the high technology that we have, we hardly ever make a decision based on the labor cost arbitrage. We take decisions of investment because it does make sense, because it is strategic, because there is a big market, because there is a pool of talent, and so on. We are not consumer products. I can understand that consumer products have the need of looking for the cheapest possible source of labor, for the cheapest possible source of raw material. We are a high technology, we have high technology businesses, and so we generally make investments due to the fact that there is a market and there is an opportunity.
Yeah. But I think the question still needs to be addressed. What is going to be the result of rising costs on the input side, and who is ultimately going to pick up those costs? Glenn?
Yes, I think perhaps obvious, but history can tell us a lot. We need to observe China as part of the evolution of the economy of the last 80 or 100 years. I personally believe, with no doubt, that countries like Indonesia, Vietnam, will become the next China of the last 20 years. And I think that in private conversations, even in China, the people that make decisions are thinking appropriately, so what is next for us, the service economy, the technology, the innovation, and it's coming, and we will be all part of that. And there will be transfer of production. I think it's just a logical consequence.
Will it be quicker or more slowly than we've seen in the past, given that this is a government that has some political levers to suppress rising costs?
Right. I think my colleague made a very important remark that you need to think in China not as one unit, but a lot of cities, a lot of competing places. So I believe we'll see some of that going on in China from state to state, from city to city, and from them to other countries. It will be an evolution.
Okay. Let's take some more questions or comments. Can we get some microphones down here? Yep, sir. Let's give you the microphone.
I'm Michael from Dalian Software Park. You know, Dalian is famous for IT outsourcing and business process outsourcing in China, represent the growth of the service industry in China. But before, normally only the low-end process, the function will migrate from the States, from Japan, European to China. But with the rise of the cost in China, definitely to retain the margin, the profit, they need to climb up the value chain. That means they need to migrate more high-end function process to China. But definitely that will have some impact on the core competence of the parent company or the company who outsource the functions in the state. So how will multinationals balance that kind of a trend? Will they retain the core competency of key process in the states in Japan, or will continue to enlarge the migration?
Okay.
Thank you.
Good. Let's just give you that question, Takeshi, because I think that's it's a relevant question for everybody as they migrate more of their core function to emerging economies, and namely China, it remains to be asked what gets left at home and what changes in the way the multinational operates.
Well, we started from, as a matter of fact, a high end instead of low end to match up with our competencies. I mean, our capability was from more or less high end, and now it's been toward the low end. So we were wondering what to do. But the key thing is, million people. How do you focus demographic segment? And in case this top end is growing a lot, and what to do with this kind of change of the income difference, which, as a matter of fact, is happening now. So we are now shifting our strategy toward the high end because we can't compete low end. So we are now bringing in our expertise, which is state of the art, all of a sudden to China, which is fitable. We don't have to wait for 10, 15 years. It's very fast to accept something new and something advanced. So we are now changing our policy toward the high end with our capability, which is in place in Japan.
Okay.
Can I
Very quickly
make a point? Yes. You asked the question, what is left home? I would say the question that we have to ask all ourselves is, where is home?
Let's not get philosophical about this.
No, I'm not philosophical.
At the end of the day, you have a headquarters, and generally that's how most
but this is mentioned by
operate.
somebody who was born in Italy and left Italy 35 years ago.
Sure.
And so that has developed home in several different parts of the world.
Sure.
And like any individual can do it, it's not a matter of philosophy, it's a matter of real life. Yeah. Like any individual is doing it, I think that multinationals have to think about it.
Yeah. It takes us off in a whole new area, which we don't have time for. So let's take some more. Let's get these microphones around. Some comments or questions? Yep, Sarah over there.
Some of the multinationals in China...
Can you tell us who you are and where you're from?
Sure. I'm from Shanghai. I'm head of the Financial Service Office of the Shanghai Municipal Government. Some multinationals are not seeing their sales in China growing as fast as they wish. So we have heard some of the complaints. Now, I'm just wondering, how much of these slowdown is due to government protection, government policies, as these multinationals allege, and some of these slowdown is due to the fact that perhaps they themselves are not innovating fast enough. Their cost structure is too bloated, because we have seen in China in the last few years the emergence of some very competitive, very innovative, and very lean companies, domestic companies. And if the reason is the second one, then it seems to me it's fair business competition, and the multinationals have themselves to blame instead of other people.
Okay, so I would take it that your conclusion is that primarily it's not about the levelness of the playing field, it's that the multinationals are too fat and too slow.
There's intensified domestic competition, and this is a new phenomenon for the multinationals to deal with.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for that. Let's get some more comments or questions. Yeah, let's get the microphone to this man down here, if we can.
Thank you. I'm Aaron, back with Dow Jones. I would like to ask about the process of government procurement, which is something that hasn't been touched on yet in this panel, but that's something that a lot of multinationals complain about, at least privately, that in bidding for wind farms or solar panel projects or telecommunications projects or what have you, there's a lot of favoritism to local companies. And even if the national policy is that shouldn't happen, local governments often go their own way and prefer to award contracts to local companies.
We'll ask that question in just a second. Let's get another one. Yeah, let's give the microphone to this man down here.
My name is Arthur Mutambara from Zimbabwe. In a recent study, there's a prediction that in 2040, China will own 40% of all GDP, and America will own 14%. If this does happen, what will be the implications for the multinationals, and how are they preparing for that eventuality?
Okay, great question. Thank you very much indeed for that. Sir, who are you, and what do you want to say?
My name is Wang Jiandong from Bohai Insurance. I think foreign investing is in itself a high-cost venture, particularly in a developing country. As China continues to develop and the environment is more and more improved, the cost of transaction will decrease. I have a question for the foreign investors. How can multinationals contribute more to the sustainability of the Chinese economic development?
Okay, that's great. I think we've had a range of very good questions there, and as our CEOs and our presidents have been listening hard, as well as our professor, we have to wrap up the event fairly shortly, so maybe we can just take what we've heard and address these as they're relevant to each person's business. Nani, maybe we can start with you.
Let me address the competition. I got a couple of them to address. As far as competition is concerned, competition is welcome. Is improving. It means improvement for everybody. If a multinational company comes into China, doesn't have the technology, the product, the cost structure, wrong. So the multinational responsibility is one of adapting the technology, the cost structure to the one that satisfies the market. But this is not only for China, but it's for everybody else. As far as the government procurement is concerned, which was the question there, out of the $6 billion, about $6 billion that we have of sales in China, the majority of those is going to government or state-owned enterprises, and I don't think that we see any kind of difficulty in these relationships that we have. And the implementation or helping the development of the economy of China is happening because we are bringing in technologies that are useful, most up-to-date kind of technologies. We are developing technologies that are good for China, and the cooperation that we have with the government and with various entities is for the best of the Chinese economy. I think I've been.
What one thing would improve your operational efficiency in China that could be done by the government tomorrow?
Buy more. I think that probably speeding up the process of some public procurement, but Geoff, it's not a problem of China alone. Public procurement is a long process in most parts of the world.
Okay, Glenn, maybe you could take some of the questions and comments.
A few points like you start for what's more dear to us. I think sustainability of China and its resources is critical for the country, for all of us. That's an obligation from the government, from companies, multinationals or local, and from each individual that lives here. I believe that we all can do more. In our case, we have a framework called Live Positively, and I think it's related to our interests. It's not a Robin Hood attitude. It's very important for us that there's water, that there's packaging, that there's resources. So we look to reinvest in those areas to make it sustainable, and I think that every company should have kind of the same consciousness. There was a question out in Japan, which I think is fascinating. We have also a big business in Japan. I believe two things we've learned from China. As we do innovation, and there's a lot of capability to do innovation in this country. We just opened a $90 million lab for innovation and have a lot of success with that. Innovation in China through entrepreneurs and through companies is way more pragmatic, I would say, than in other countries. It's not innovation per se for the sake of innovation. There's a pragmatism, a speed of business here that I would say is almost Chinese. It really works.
Okay. Takeshi, can you address some of the issues that have been raised?
Yeah, well, regarding the competition of the multinationals, two things are very important as a key factors. One, quick decision-making by CEO. I'm thinking to live in maybe China for 1/3 of a year to see details of what's happening. So much change will be happening within a year, within 2 years. Second, how we can develop human capitals, local human capitals to compete with the local players. So we started to hire in Japan, though Japanese speaking, but the Chinese people, 1/3 of new recruits are Chinese, and maybe sent to China to compete with the local players. So human capital is very important to compete with the local players.
Yeah, and your key takeaway in terms of what you do going forward, how could the Chinese government make your life easier?
I think this kind of efforts by multinationals will be so much appreciated by the government as well as the local governments. Especially, I just focus on local government so that we can get a lot of favors, such as tax saving, stuff like that. And plus, we create jobs, such as because we set up the factories on our own and the logistics on their own, but they are entrepreneurs or Chinese corporations. So that will be a big benefit for the governments, local governments, as well as the central government.
Okay. Professor Jia Kang, can I ask you as well to give us your comments in response to the questions and comments you've heard?
I mainly respond to the question about the government procurement, because this is very closely related to my research area. After China acceded to the WTO, regarding the government procurement agreement, the Chinese government promised to participate in the government procurement negotiations, and we've been following the timetable. So under the framework of WTO, governments are still trying to reconcile their opinions. For instance, is it allowed that governments give preferential treatment or favors to local businesses? It seems in practice this existed in the past. It existed in the US and other countries as well. For instance, when the financial crisis started, a lot of countries advocated for buying national product. And in China and in other emerging countries, we also believe it is important that we have a special treatment in this regard. I think emerging countries and developing countries should be given special terms and conditions in this regard. They should be allowed to give priority to local businesses in terms of procurement, and particularly those with indigenous innovation and local characteristics. But as far as the timetable for the final rules, it will take about 5 to 10 years. However, as a member of the WTO, we will implement the agreement if it's finalized.
Ask the others what China could do. What do the multinationals need to do to operate more effectively in China?
In my understanding, in the history of human development, actually multinationals no longer bear a very clear national mark. In a world of seeking common development and a multiple win, they will play a very important role. So I think we need to concentrate on the rationalization of the economy, and we need to do away with the prejudice. I think in the world economy, China will welcome multinationals, will participate in worldwide competition, and China also exports not only products but also technology and other things. So this is a worldwide trend. So I don't think your question is really important. We don't really need to have a label.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for that. Nice to finish on the host being told that his question's irrelevant to the topic at hand. But before we go, and our time is very close to an end here, our friend from Roland Berger described the survey they did. 40% of those 500 European companies said they felt that conditions were likely to worsen in China, both regulatory and operational. Could you give me a show of hands as to how you feel the regulatory and operating environment is going to change over the next 2 years? Are you more or less optimistic than those European businesses? Just put your hand up if you feel conditions are likely to worsen or get harder over the next 2 years. Don't be shy. We're not filming you, we're filming them. Good. Well, that's significantly lower, obviously, than the 40%. So you've been convinced by our multinationals and by our good professor that everything is fine operating here in China. Ladies and gentlemen, could you please show your appreciation to the panel, and thank you so much for being with us here at this World Economic Forum CNBC special.